Okay, hello YouTube, this is Trevor, and this is going to be my playthrough of Hospital Survival All 100 Waves on the PC version of Iron Brigade with commentary, and 4 times sped up. So, I'm doing this version as kind of an alternative if you kind of wanted more information or some clarification as to my strategy, and if you don't mind the commentary and definitely want to save the time with it being sped up 4 times, because of course it's all well and good, and having a full played out version where you can just watch the whole playthrough in its raw form, which I do plan on posting first, but I just figured I'd do this version to, give you the opportunity to receive more information or possibly just get some clarification on some parts of my strategy, because some parts may have kind of got you scratching your head, or just had a question, poke your curiosity, I guess. But yeah, so definitely I'm going to do that. I didn't want to leave a commentary version as the only option. I kind of tried it at first and initially found out right away that not only do I struggle with providing good commentary while I'm playing, but also, most when I'm on YouTube and I'm looking for strategies with video games, I don't particularly favor commentaries. I'll usually end up muting the video, or I'd rather not have a commentary if I don't want a commentary, so definitely want to provide that option for the viewer. Anyways, back to the game. So, Hospital Survival is the easiest of the 3 survivals, obviously, because it's the first one, and it's also the one without the DLC, so it's the one people are probably most familiar with and probably have access to if they don't have the DLC version of Iron Brigade for some reason, even though you should have it. Steam, I believe, does provide it right off the bat if you buy it on Steam. Anyways, so we're on wave 7 now. The first few waves of Hospital Survival are actually, they're still pretty easy, even though they are a bit bouncing back and forth between the unit types, and they're pretty jarring. Like I think there's one wave that had knobs, and there was that Volt Dropper wave. I think it was the first one, wave 7. Volt Droppers, if you don't have enough snipers at the ready, then you'll have to shoot at it with a shotgun or a sniper if you do happen to have one, to deal enough damage to take care of it. Getting the objective hit by the Volt Dropper in the first appearance of the Volt Dropper is not the end of the world. However, you do want to foolproof your towers pretty quick against Volt Droppers, because you don't want to have to handle Volt Droppers at all yourself. But really, that's kind of the idea of survival, is the survival solo anyways, is that you are using the Honeychurch chassis to put down a welter of different emplacements that basically take care of the units best as possible without your intervention. However, there are quite a few different types of units that are going to create problems for you and are going to require your manual intervention, and that's particularly the Knobs and the Jacobs ladders. They're just the Jacobs, the units that have Jacobs protection. Those are almost always going to be needing those right there. So whenever the Jacobs appear, you're definitely going to want to run in that direction. Of course, it's pretty obvious, but for the most part, that is the strat. There is a good way to actually combat Jacobs, but it's not a foolproof method, unlike most of the other methods for even the unlikely stuff like Knobs. So Knobs, there are towers that are made specifically to counter Knobs, but obviously when you're operating solo, you only have so many to choose from with the Honeychurch. Even when you have the Honeychurch, which is I believe it is the most emplacement heavy chassis. There's the Selker, I think it's called, but it's not really decent for use. So that one is a pretty mean one. Also, what's noteworthy about Knobs is that they go straight for the objective if they can't find a tower that's convenient enough for them to attack. And that's kind of the cool thing, is that even, there's the exploit of placing the sniper turrets high up on the rocks or on other props throughout the map that basically render them inaccessible to the Knobs completely. But even if they're out of the way, they don't even have to be on top of a rock. They could just be on a portion of the map that is just notably less convenient for the Knobs to attempt to attack. The Knobs will still just go straight for the objective and ignore the sniping turret completely. And you'll notice these spots as you play more and more. get to like wave 30 or 40, when you see sniper turrets that you know probably should have been destroyed, but they haven't been destroyed yet, it's pretty safe to just go ahead and start upgrading those sniper turrets. And that's usually how I play, is I'll focus on just tower placement first, and then I'll worry about upgrading them. I usually don't even bother with upgrading until like wave 30, when I know for a fact that my tower placement is pretty foolproof. It's usually around wave 30 in Hospital Survival where things are kind of pivotal. If your tower placement is good and your strat is good, you'll make it past waves 30 to 40 pretty easy. And if you really struggle through waves 30 to 40, you might want to consider a restart or just let them kill your objective, because if you're struggling at those waves and your objective's HP is very low and you don't feel like you're doing enough against the Jacobs and the Big Willies and the Berthas. The Berthas are a huge problem on Hospital. I think it's by far the biggest problem is the Berthas, especially with Jacob's protection, because the knobs ruin your towers pretty quick. And I don't initially use the strategy because it kind of is not. I'm kind of doing it right there, like just surrounding the objective with damp generators. It's a good strategy for when you have a lot of scrap to spare and you just need a good buffer zone of keeping the knobs away from your objective, so that the knobs don't ever cause your objective to lose HP. Now you'll also probably notice that it's only wave 24 and I've actually used up over a third of my objective's HP. It may seem like a big early game loss, but it's actually not. Well, I mean, it could technically be considered that, but the thing is, as long as you're trading your objective's HP for certain towers being safe and scrap, then you really don't have to worry about losing too much of the objective's HP. I usually try my best to keep the objective's HP above 50%, and if I go below 50%, then I just have to make sure that I'm, you know, above wave 50, my strat is pretty foolproof, and that I don't desperately need to restart. Now, what you just saw about, I want to say 15 to 20 seconds ago, was me dying. One of the cool things about solo is, so when you're playing survival multiplayer with your friends, you have to worry about reviving each other if you don't have a repair crane. And the reason why I don't come in equipped with a repair crane, so I have the damp gens and the collection pods as my support turrets, is because when I get killed by attacking units, particularly the blitzers and the sniper tuners, you don't necessarily die, you just get the option to jam a key, and it's a randomly selected key every time. I think it varies between B, R, E, Q, and you have to tap that key repeatedly and then you're back in the game. And from what I understand, there isn't really a limit. Like, I don't think there's a live count. It just constantly lets you revive yourself like a self-revive. So a repair crane isn't really necessary. Just get killed, and the only lose condition really is if your objective gets destroyed, which makes sense, but at the same time it's kind of broken. It gives you a good chance to do okay in solo. I think that may have been intended to make solo much more reasonable, because solo is kind of a handful, even with the Honeychurch and relying on your emplacements to do most of the work, because the Jacobs in particular and knobs constantly destroying your towers, depending on your tower placement. So there are some bits of tower placement which is a bit, it really puts you off as far as like what the knobs would choose to attack. For example, the ridge on the bridge, like the lip on either side of the bridge leading to that far off spawn. You'd think that that's not high enough for knobs to want to attack towers placed on it, but most of the time, almost all the towers I put on that lip, like on the lip, it has to be on the lip, so slightly elevated from the pathway, the knobs won't attack them. At least from what I saw. It seems like the knobs will try to attack them, so they'll float, like they'll dance in that direction of the tower, and then they'll float around the tower for a little bit, but then they'll just carry on. So I wonder what algorithm Double Fine set up for that, but it doesn't seem to be a very smart one. It's just, hey, can I reach this tower? No? Alright, timer out, I'll just find another tower, and then it just keeps going. So just definitely exploit that and use the ridge. So that ridge right there is an extremely good spot for snipers, just planting snipers all over the place, and that's usually what ends up being the reliant strat towards the end of wave 50, is you just plant snipers everywhere. Because the volume of fire from the snipers becomes so high that aerials don't become a problem, the sniper tuners don't become a problem. And even knobs get shredded by your sniper turrets, and that's eventually what you do want, is for the volume of the fire to be high enough to where knobs and other small units just don't become a problem. It's pretty handy. And so yeah, see, now it's just past wave 30 and I'm upgrading sniper turrets, and you definitely want to focus on sniper turrets that are in reliable spots and notably in optimal positions to fire on most of the units that come up. Another thing that you may have noticed is I'll put a string of damp gens down the pathways leading to the lanes of the spawns, but I won't go too close to the spawns with damp gens. So the reason for that is a general part of my strategy is if you want to slow the units, you want to slow them all in the same place, and that's by the objective. It may seem counterintuitive because the last place you want them to be is close to your objective, but I mean, it's really okay to lose a bit of objective HP, and what really matters is keeping all of the units slowed in one area instead of slowed all over the map, because you want to be able to attack them, and you can only be in one place at one time, so that way you can see them. So honestly, I'd rather them sprint relatively close to the objective, but not all the way up to the objective, and then get slowed so that I can see them. And then I can make a judgment call from there whether or not I should actually manually intervene, or if I should just let my towers take care of it. And that'll give my towers more time to take care of it, because most of the towers that have a universal line of fire from all three spawn points for the creeps is in the center. In fact, the center at this point is littered with snipers, and most of the upgraded sniper turrets are in the center. And so these shotgun turrets, which I'm placing right by the spawn, is a part of that strat against the Jacobs. So the Jacobs, of course, they will do their best to stick with the unit that they're protecting, but they're going to hang in the back more often than not. Sometimes they'll buckle around to the side and they'll basically be dumb for the sake of being dumb, but Jacobs will always tend to linger in the back, and if you have sniper turrets that are further away from the objective, like those on the bridge, on the lip of the bridge, then they eventually end up getting a line of fire with those Jacobs, and then the Jacobs will get killed just autonomously by your turrets, and then they can get shredded from there, the Big Willie or the Bertha or whatever the heck the Jacobs is protecting. And that's generally the idea. So the turrets... I kind of lost my train of thought. But yeah, generally, having any sort of turrets close to the spawn, it's typically just going to be the camo shotguns. The camo shotguns, I believe, are a part of the Mars DLC, and I believe they are only obtainable by completing up to wave 30 on the settlement survival, so you will need to get up to wave 30 on the settlement survival to get the camo shotguns. Other than that, you'll probably end up having super shredders be your light turret. I think my video memory ran out, so it's not... Okay, there it goes again. Sorry, I'm watching my preview to match the audio up with the videos, so I apologize if I lose my train of thought because the video is slowing down. So loot boxes, I believe, don't have a timer to where they disappear, so you can kind of get them on your own time. But definitely, at this point, we're at wave 50. Priorities is pretty much just attacking Jacobs, and that's actually most of what occurs in Hospital Survival. Is by far most of the waves are just Big Willies and Jacobs, and usually coming from the same spawn every time. Sometimes you'll get a bit of a curveball, like they'll throw resistors at you from one other way. Sometimes with Jacob's protection, sometimes with not. But all you really got to do is perfect your strategy and make sure that the Jacobs are being killed by your towers, just often enough to where it becomes less of an issue for you. Obviously, they're not going to kill the Jacobs every time, but every time they do, it's one less need for you to be in that place at that given time and wasting your time having to be there. Because you can only be in one place at one time. So really what you want to do is just spend as much time as possible optimizing your towers. And then any time where you have to manually intervene is precious, so you'll want it to be worthwhile. So I'll have to wait until the video gets to a certain point where I can point it out, but the one lane that leads from the bottom of the hill upwards, not that lane, but the one on the opposite side of this lane that I'm on right now in the video. I might go to it in a second here. Yeah, over this way. Yeah, that lane that I'm at, right? Yeah, this lane. Oh, okay, now I'm sprinting the other way. This lane right here, that lane right there is by far the biggest problem. It's the most pesky of the routes that you have to watch out for with the creeps. Generally, the bridge is almost no issue at all because it's completely linear, and all you really have to do is put the snipers on the rim of the bridge on the left and the right, and then the camo shotguns lining all around the spawn. And that's usually enough to take care of any Jacobs and annihilate the big willies pretty fast coming from that spawn across the bridge. The other route from the bottom of the hill, the longer one that is next to that ruin right there, that I'm putting the snipers by, yeah, that lane right there. That one's not as much of a problem, mostly because it's longer, and also because it's got a wider range of fire from more sniper turrets. You can place a lot more sniper turrets around it, and thus it's much more of a, much less of a nuisance and much more of an easier time for you to micromanage. But that smaller lane, the smaller lane from the bottom of the hill up, that lane is always a pain, mostly because it really doesn't leave too many open lanes of fire for your sniper turrets, and even if you put a ton of camo shotguns down there, for some reason, I think it's because of how steep the terrain is, Jacobs never manage to get killed very easily going up that hill, and they can always manage to protect their units all the way up to the top of the hill, and then by then they're a threat just like that. They're a threat to your objective, so you have to end up killing them right there. And if you are the sort of player that likes to emphasize damp gens, you might end up throwing a lot of damp gens at that lane, and then just dealing with it when the knobs annihilate it, and then just replacing it. And you probably noticed that I never upgrade my damp gens. I literally just use them as throwaway towers. I'll just place them to essentially form a buffer. Yeah, just like that. Just stringing damp gens all the way down that lane is what I would imagine to be a pretty decent strategy. So I'm not stockpiling scrap, if you're wondering. The scrap count is getting pretty high. I just really like to spend a lot of it in one go so that I can essentially optimize my towers more, and it's just a lot easier for me to place the towers in a way which I know will work optimally for the strategy that I use. Basically waiting for the scrap to build up and then spending it on one tower at a time only just makes it difficult for me to basically get in that mindset. And the way that Hospital is paced, especially in solo, there's not really a huge problem with stocking up at least up to 500 to 800 scrap. It's not that big an issue. So what wave are we on now? Wave 64, so we're well past halfway through, nearly 2/3 of the way through Hospital Survival. And you can see that, you know, we've got towers everywhere. And that whole ridge up there by that lane has sniper turrets all over it. Yeah, pretty much that. That right there is the most annoying thing to deal with on Hospital Survival is the knobs. Because I believe what it does is you get a swarm of knobs that spawns first. Jacobs, like 2 or 3 Jacobs will spawn, and then the Bertha spawns, and then Jacobs behind that. And the idea is that even after you've defeated the knobs, or the Jacobs protecting the knobs, which takes some time in the later waves, the knobs are still going to annihilate a good chunk of towers by the time that they get destroyed. And then the Bertha is going to be an additional problem on top of that. Manually intervening up to wave 70 or 80 is, you know, it's a pretty good choice. if you feel like your towers are doing a good job with the other lanes, because you can still deal a good amount of damage to the units. Honestly, if you didn't have these shotguns, I forget what they're called, the Muerte Fiesta Numero 6, it would just be way too difficult for you to deal the damage, and you'd have to be relying on your towers. Honestly, even the sniper turrets feel a bit underwhelming after wave 80, and this is after you've upgraded them all to the third tier, so they're fully upgraded sniper turrets. So you can see occasionally a Big Willy is making it up from that lane, but those other two lanes, the one leading up from the other side and the bridge lane, honestly, those lanes, Big Willies, they may seem like they get close, but they are never an issue. And if anything, another issue is when the Big Willies come up on that shorter lane from the bottom of the hill, they'll trample the damp gens that I place down, and I try to figure out a way to place them to where they don't get trampled, but it's always kind of difficult because I still want to optimally place them. And in the end, it still does slow the Big Willy just before they get there. So at this point, it's pretty much just damage control. Any towers that get destroyed, I replace, and any towers that I kind of just lost my bearings on the video here. But it is just damage control. Upgrading any towers that haven't been upgraded yet, and replacing any towers that have been destroyed, if I feel like that's their role, is just to be replaced at that point, like the damp gens on the bridge, the damp gens on the shorter lane. And past that, it's pretty much just a smooth grind to the finish. It is just a grind at this point. After wave 50, hospital survival is just a grind. There's not really any different strategy going on, or any serious curveballs the game throws at you. Not unlike Swamp and Settlement. Settlement is awful with curveballs, but Hospital is pretty consistent. You just have to worry about the knobs and the Jacobs and Big Willies mostly. This game, the Hospital Survival has a lot of waves of just Jacobs and Big Willies, and they do get particularly annoying towards the end because after a certain amount of waves, they have so much HP that it's really difficult to kill them, even with all the turrets fully upgraded. And it is just making sure everything is optimized. And you do need to make sure that there is some strategy in play to combat Jacobs with autonomy and not with manual intervention, because if you're relying too much on manual intervention to take care of Jacobs, you're going to have problems. You're going to have knobs sneaking up and destroying chunks of your base when you don't even realize it, and that's by far like the worst thing to happen is if you lose track of one side of your base and have to go back, or lose a bunch of base HP because a bunch of resistors protected by a Jacobs made it up the hill. More often than not, that's actually how I lose when I'm in the early game and I don't have my strategy nailed down, is there's a bunch of resistors. I think it's coming up. There might be a wave that has it in particular, but there's a bunch of resistors that spawn from the short lane, and they have 4 Jacobs protecting them. And this is in the late 80s, early 90s, I think, of waves, when the HP is so high that it's very difficult to kill the Jacobs, and you have to rely on your turrets to help you out a little bit at least. Killing them by the time that you kill all the Jacobs that are protecting them, they're already at your base, even with damp jets. But so what we just saw back there, occasionally that will happen. I think that's the next annoying thing, is aerials protected by Jacobs. So I think it spawns on the lower spawns, is aerials will spawn. Yeah, they'll spawn from the lower spawns, and then 1 or 2 Jacobs will spawn from that same spawn and protect the aerials. It's pretty pretty much the most solid strat is to just have a ton of camo shotgun turrets down there and just hope that they kill the Jacobs. They never do spawn a lot of Jacobs to protect the aerials, it's just one or two. So it's a pretty solid bet that those Jacobs can be killed by the camo shotguns. And if they're not, as long as you're in the area, just get beneath the aerials so that the aerials shoot at you and not at the objective. Because if they start shooting at the objective with Jacob's protection, that's pretty much going to be the biggest nuisance. Because of the terrain, it's hard for you to get a line of fire on the Jacobs if you don't have it already. So it's particularly tough to deal with that. And that right there is also something annoying that can happen, but it rarely happens. I think that was probably the last wave where it happens. Wave 88 is burst transmitters and Jacobs protecting them. So I don't think I really have much else to say. It's kind of just repeating myself at this point. Really, the video kind of speaks for itself. But it is just a coast to the finish after you get to a certain point, like after waves 50 to 70, as long as your strategy is pretty solid and you've optimized placement of your towers, which, I mean, that shows for itself after those waves. If your towers aren't optimally placed, then you likely will have lost so much base HP at wave 50 to 70 that you wouldn't consider it worthwhile to carry on, or something like that, something along those lines. You would probably just have a really, really hard time at that point, and if you scored with your tower placement and did pretty good, then you would have no issues getting through waves 70 to 90, especially with the common strat of tackling Jacobs wherever you saw them, which is pretty much my strat. Whenever there's a Jacob spawn indicator, I go for it. And not necessarily to stick around for it again, just to make sure that my towers are doing their job. That for example was pretty annoying. Tommy's and Jacob's protecting them. So I'll leave it at that, and yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I'll hopefully be able to release one on Swamp soon. I believe I did complete 100 waves on Swamp, but I don't know for sure, because my Iron Brigade shows a PB of 83. So it might have lost the save data of the previous one, but I'm pretty sure I did. And I'm really hoping I can nail 100 waves of settlement at some point. I'm gonna have to probably start bookmarking waves and reporting what unit spawns are in them, because it's that bad. Settlement is so bad with curveballs and unit types that just come and basically wreck your towers or exploit. It's mostly also that settlement has 3 objectives compared to just the one in hospital. Having 3 objectives and only losing one being a lose condition is really rough. So yeah, appreciate it, and hopefully see you next time.
That's right.